Welcome to the Indo Politics, our look back at the last 7 days in the world of politics. Tabitha Monaghan, she's away in New York this week, disabling escalators and breaking teleprompters for Donald Trump, no doubt. So it's me, Fionnán, Sheahan, sitting in for her, and I'm joined by Mary Regan, Political Editor. Mary, let's talk about New York later, but there was more action happening here. The presidential election, we now know exactly what the ticket is, but there was nearly a fourth candidate. What do you make of Maria Steen's claim that basically she was blocked out and that this was undemocratic?
Well, there's been a lot of blame put on the main parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, for instructing either directly or indirectly their county councillors to not back an independent candidate. But I think if you look at it, there are enough independents there that could have got an independent candidate on the ticket, but they just chose not to. So this isn't really a Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael problem. The problem is that Maria Steen herself couldn't get the backing of enough independents in the Oireachtas, some of them who'd be on the same side as her ideologically, but still chose not to back her. Michael McDougall being a prime example of that.
Ideologically on certain issues, though.
Well, I mean, that may have been on the same side as her during referendums and the family and care referendum in particular. They were on the same side there.
So they had worked. I mean, this was the issue here is 12 months ago, Maria Steen and Michael McDougall were sharing the same platform. Michael McDougall set up a group to campaign against the family and care referendums. He invited Maria Steen onto that. 12 months later, he won't even sign her nomination papers.
And he wasn't even entertaining it, by all accounts. He wasn't even willing to take the phone calls. And Maria Steen herself was in Leinster House on Tuesday, like all day long, walking around with various Oireachtas members. And there was a, intense campaign underway to either her attempts to meet people, to have chats with them, phones them, email, get onto them. And Michael McDougall, I think from day one, just wasn't entertaining backing her at all. Independent Ireland a week previously seemed to be reluctant to back her. They didn't seem keen on the idea. They spoke about the pressure they were coming under from certain individuals in the Oireachtas, and they weren't taking kindly to the degree of pressure, but they had an about turn and they met her on Monday night, I think it was, and they agreed to back her. But ultimately, I think she just left it a bit too late.
Is this not part of the problem? Ultimately, Maria Steen's campaign only started really at the start of September. Even at the end of August, her name was being associated with it, and she was saying, "Oh, I'm honoured to hear my name mentioned, but I haven't made any such decision." So she left it a bit too late. Yet was able to get 18 out of 20. You had this Pater Tobin kind of caucus that he put together of 12 or so, largely you'd say conservative Oireachtas members, but there was a couple of others in there, such as Paul Gogarty, who nobody could ever accuse of being a conservative, I suppose. Then a couple of more came online. The Healy-Rae boys weighed in behind her, even though Michael Healy-Rae is back in Heather Humphreys. Then you had Independent Ireland. So suddenly she's hitting the high teens, and you were thinking, listen, a couple of other people will come on board here who are not backing anybody thus far. But just didn't. So why did nobody say, look, we're going to lend you a signature here. We're not supporting you. We're not endorsing you. We're not backing you, but we believe you have a democratic right to be on the ticket.
Yeah, and Marion Harkin also came on board on Tuesday. So that was seen as kind of giving a great bit of momentum there. I think, some people in government might be a little bit annoyed that the independents in government, Michael Healy-Rae, Marion Harkin, were backing an opponent to the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael candidates. And I think what happened is Maria Steen might have left it a bit too late in the day. She also, what some of those who didn't back her are saying is that they were coming under a bit too much pressure. It was a little bit too heavy-handed to give the nomination, and they just kind of backed away from that a little bit. But maybe if she had started a bit sooner, if she had gone down the council route, she might have had more success that way, given that there were a number of councillors willing to back her. And I just think that she we looked at her. There was a lot of talk around her fancy handbag that cost 30 grand or 20 grand allegedly, if it's the real deal. And apparently those handbags, you have to build up a relationship with the vendor over 5 years. So maybe she needed to start working on those relationships with the Oireachtas members a bit sooner than sort of in the last week. And, she only really came into it about a week before nominations, really,
Yeah, because ultimately the council route was shut down, but you'd say that it was shut down pretty late. I mean, if we're going back to earlier in the summer, there was kind of an open door for people. You saw Garrett Sheridan was lobbying a lot of councils, latterly Nick Delahunty and some other. There was so many names floating out there, but it did strike one that nobody had launched a proper concerted campaign at council level over the course of 6 months or 9 months or since the start of the year to say, listen, I have an incontrovertible argument here that I have asked you to nominate me. And her case is slightly different in that she has participated in public life. She has campaigned both on losing sides and winning sides in referendums, where these other guys were kind of new, largely speaking, to politics. Nick Delahunty ran in the general election last year. Garrett Sheridan had nothing really to show. So is there an argument here that this is the establishment blocking somebody out?
It depends on what you call the establishment, because,
that takes in a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have more independents or various groupings in the Dáil than ever before, far more than 2011 when a number of independent candidates got on the pitch. We now have more independents in the Oireachtas and just more fragmented groups, smaller parties in the Oireachtas. So the route was there to facilitate an independent candidate through the Oireachtas. It's actually quite astonishing given the number that there isn't an independent candidate. But I guess what it shows is that maybe the sort of right of Irish politics is almost as unable to agree things as the left of Irish politics.
As fragmented. Now, so that's Maria Steen. She's not on the ticket. That's it. Done and dusted. At the close of deadline, 12 noon on Wednesday, it was just Katherine Connelly, Heather Humphreys and Jim Gavin. And Katherine Connelly, as you say, the right is fragmented. The left has unified. And I thought Eileen Flynn, the independent senator, kind of put it best. It wasn't that the left unified, it was that Katherine Connelly unified the left in bringing lately Sinn Féin, previously the Labour Party, who were equally fairly slow to come on board, the same with the Greens. The Soc Dems were there early, People Before Profit were early, and other independents were there from the start. So the fact that she has this unified left bloc, does that now make her a player in this election?
Well, it does, but the risk in presenting it as the left working together and presenting it as a sort of road test for the next general election to show that they can form an alternative government that doesn't involve Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, the risk with that is that if it doesn't work, then they're showing that they can't do it, let's say. So, I mean, between the lot of those parties working for it, they would have, let's say, 35% of the vote, thereabouts between them. But there are two questions then. The first being, will all those parties and their supporters back Katherine Connelly? And, talking to Sinn Féin TDs, I think there's a little bit of reluctance there. There was definitely reluctance over the summer to get in behind her campaign. People actually in Sinn Féin wanted Mary Lou McDonald herself to run. And without having a Sinn Féin name on the ballot, to what extent will Sinn Féin activists really go out and campaign for her or vote for her? The same with the Labour Party, which seems very torn about their support for Katherine Connelly. Marie Sherlock was on stage with her during her launch earlier in the week. But Alan Kelly was on the radio earlier that day and he was criticising her comments on Hamas, saying he thinks that she should perhaps withdraw them. And then Jed Nash was on speaking to journalists on the plinth in Leinster House on Tuesday, saying, well, I would have chose different wording to that, and being very, stating very clearly Hamas is a terrorist organisation. That's the Labour Party's position, and her words were not the kind of words we would use. So that's Labour. And then you had Paul Murphy coming out, giving out about Alan Kelly, saying, well, it's a great thing for Katherine Connelly's campaign that Alan Kelly is against it and that Alan Kelly is an opponent of Katherine Connelly. That actually helps her campaign because we don't want Alan Kelly anyhow because of his involvement in the previous government and his involvement in Fine Gael coalition and Labour coalition and all that. So the left are already fighting amongst themselves
Yeah.
about Katherine Connelly.
So there's kind of an apathy in some elements of Sinn Féin towards her. There's an antipathy towards her from elements of the Labour Party. There's no question about that, and people have said that. Ultimately, though, like, where else are they going to go? I mean, if people on the left aren't going to vote for Katherine Connelly, what, they're going to vote for the Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael candidate?
Yeah, and that points to Katherine Connelly's comments on Hamas, on she was speaking about Germany.
So on the
picking up
Hamas front,
arms.
so this was basically where she said Hamas are part of the fabric of Palestinian society, because she was basically being asked, should, as Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, said, Hamas have no further role in Palestine, and she was kind of slightly nuanced on that. At the same time, she's saying she has condemned Hamas. They are a prescribed terrorist organisation, that she agrees with that, but that they got a democratic mandate previously. Then in relation to Germany, she's saying it reminds her of the 1930s, the military build-up. In both cases, she's having to kind of explain, clarify, contextualise what her answers are. And in the world of diplomacy, you don't always get that opportunity, do you?
Yeah, so she herself has admitted that her language can be blunt, but she's sort of worn that as a badge of honour. So she is saying, this is who I am. This is my.
But now you want to be president. You're not just an independent TD who's speaking for yourself. You're going to be speaking for the whole country.
And I
if you
think
go
that's
president.
the problem for some people in Labour, maybe Sinn Féin less so, but that she is very rigid in her views. And that's fine, but if she wants to sort of expand her appeal beyond the 35% that vote for those left parties, then she might have to maybe not compromise, but maybe a bit more nuanced in her views. For example, her comments on Hamas. I mean, yes, she accepts that they're a terrorist organisation, but there's a difference between what she's saying, which is, asked if they're a terrorist organisation, she says, well, that's the designation. And when you ask someone in Labour, they say, absolutely, no question, they're a terrorist organisation. So if she is not willing to maybe have a bit more nuance, a bit more context in her responses to a lot of these issues, then she's going to alienate maybe more centre ground voters. And
who she ultimately is going to need, because we know from the general election, just as the left are claiming they're going to unify over on what we call the centre or the right, from the general election, we saw Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael voters are now very comfortable with transferring between each other.
Yeah.
And this may well pass through to the presidential election, where Jim Gavin and Heather Humphreys, they're both very centrist, they're both very safe in what they say. There might be a similar effect there. So that basically means that Katherine Connelly is going to have to come way ahead of the other two candidates on the first count, because it's likely they will transfer between each other.
Exactly. And she needs transfers from either of them. And you'd have to expect anyone voting for Jim Gavin will transfer to Heather Humphreys, vice versa. Unless Katherine Connelly gets transfers from, women voters, the Heather Humphrey people transfer to women perhaps. But it's hard to see where she'll get the transfers as things stand. And then you would have to say she takes up the whole left space of Irish politics, which is a considerable vote. But then you'd have to wonder the sort of centre vote or centre left. It's a vacant space, the centre left in this election, because you might say that there are people who are left leaning, but they find Katherine Connelly's views a little bit too left or too rigid. And who are they going to vote for? So you'd have to think in that sense, would make sense for Jim Gavin or Heather Humphreys to kind of appeal to that more centre left vote.
Yeah, is this the reality of politics, I suppose, is you can get elected on your own platform, that's great. But when you're going to a wider level, be it going into coalition or running an election like this, you need to compromise on certain things, and you need to be more broad-based. It was interesting at Katherine Connelly's launch how each of the other parties were getting up and praising her, coincidentally, on the issues that matter most to them. Although Roderick O'Gorman got up and said she's great, environmentalist and climate change is very important. Or Mary Lou McDonald said it's United Ireland. Marie Sherlock of the Labour Party said, it's workers' rights. And Holly Cairns said it's about social justice. That's because those are the kind of things that you guys are interested in. They all agree that she's very strong on her stance on Gaza. But ultimately, they were showing you have to be a broad-based coalition here in order to get elected. Is that going to be a problem for her?
Yeah, I think so. And if this experiment, as they're kind of describing it, up the left fails, then where does it leave all the left parties between now and the next general election? You know, do they start blaming each other if Katherine Connelly doesn't get elected? Probably. And, you know, Mary Lee MacDonald has taken a gamble here, I guess, that she is more invested in showing that their parties of the left can work together ahead of the next election than she's invested in building Sinn Féin's own vote share through this presidential election.
Yeah. What about then the other two candidates? Because it's been fairly slow and steady so far for Heather Humphreys, but she is talking a bit more now. One of Heather Humphreys' selling points is that she is from the border counties. She is a Presbyterian. She can reach out to communities in Northern Ireland that others can't, because I mean she is effectively of a family and a community that was effectively trapped on the wrong side of the border when under the treaty and the separation of the Irish Free State and Northern Ireland, and that gives her a unique ability to say, well, I will build bridges because I know people and I can relate to them. Yet she can't even explain something as simple as, why would a Presbyterian from a border county be a member of the Orange Order?
Yeah, and arguably if that is her big selling point, her President for All logo, she missed a brilliant opportunity to really articulate that in a sort of way that people might really get behind or understand. When she was asked at her campaign launch about her husband's membership of the Orange Order, and she stumbled on that question, and the first answer was like, well, why don't you ask him? And she kind of got quite defensive around it. And then she was on radio during this week and she was asked about it, and she said on Drive Time, well, how would you like if you were asked about something your husband did before you got married? You'd feel, that you were caught off guard, which I think was quite revealing, because she was saying she was completely caught off guard. Which you'd have to wonder, well, why was she caught off guard? Is she not, prepped enough in terms of her responses here? And also, is she able to think on her feet?
Yeah.
And not get flustered? And that's going to really matter when it comes down to the television debates in the latter part of the campaign. And if you look back to previous presidential campaigns, in some way they're a matter of the last man or the last woman standing. Like, who's left standing after everyone else falls? Mary McAleese, when she contested an election against Eddie Roche, had the sort of she had the sort of hardness to endure the toughness of the campaign and to answer questions, because there was a lot thrown her way, as well. And she won ultimately as a result. And then if you look to like Michael D. Higgins in the 2011 election, all the candidates there fell one by one. So you have to be really able to think on your feet, respond to questions or surprises that come your way. And it's not the kind of campaign where something unexpected can catch you off guard.
Yeah, and you were kind of looking at that Heather Humphreys scenario going, this doesn't augur well. This has always been the concern about Heather Humphreys and her campaign. How does she come across live on her feet and in debates? That doesn't augur well.
No, and particularly because she's the most experienced politician on the field, and she's been in cabinet.
She has a selling point that she can say, I brought pieces of legislation through the Oireachtas. I know all about legislation. I know all about government because I was in government. I know all about trade missions because I was on trade missions as Minister for Enterprise. I know all about reaching out because I was Minister for 1916 commemoration. So she's got all these things, and yet she can't articulate them.
But if you think back to her time as minister, she had a bit of a charmed ministerial career. She was never in a portfolio when she was sharply under the spotlight.
Yeah.
She never, as far as I can remember, had a big controversy or crisis that she had to come out and defend and do doorsteps and difficult doorsteps or difficult press conferences. So she seems sort of unused to that. Rough and tumble?
Yeah, it was almost, there was an element of her being wrapped in cotton wool for too long, and now it's counting against her because she's not able to as you say, think on her feet and respond to curveballs.
And she's going to have to respond to so many questions about the
government's record.
The government's record.
Yeah.
She, again, when she's asked questions about the government's record, she says things like, well, there will always be challenges and, we have to overcome the challenges. So she kind of goes into minister mode.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's going to help her. If she is to be the president, she has to break out of that ministerial response mode and grow into a more sort of presidential stature, I guess.
What about Jim Gavin? This week, he started with basically saying, I'm being targeted by a smear campaign on social media. It's utterly untrue. This is upsetting me, my family, my friends, and something has to be done about social media.
Yeah, but nothing is being done,
Yes, he's also running for the main party in government who are quite happy for the lorry loads of money to come in from and corporation taxes from the social media companies, but not to anything.
Absolutely. And Micheál Martin, speaking in New York, I think said, social media companies, they just have to, they have to stop this. They really need to examine what they're doing.
If only they were based in Dublin and we could go down and knock on their door.
If only there were lawmakers who could force them to do this, So I just thought that was odd of Micheál Martin kind of push it back onto the social media companies. And now Jim Gavin finds himself having to defend Fianna Fáil's record in government on failing to more adequately regulate the tech companies. So he's now defending Fianna Fáil on that. And you hear it now around Leinster as well, something has to be done, something has to be done, something has to be done. But does something only have to be done now because it's landing on their own presidential candidate's doorstep? Something had to be done a couple of years ago. It's a bit too late. So that seems to have taken up much of the focus on Jim Gavin. Of course, there's no suggestion that any of the other parties or any of the other candidates have had this smear campaign against him. But he's found himself, having to defend himself against smear, which is not a good place for any candidate to have to be.
No, and again, smears without any foundation whatsoever, just a personalised attack basically on him. I mean, you could call it election interference because basically somebody is trying to put out these rumours against the man that were without basis.
And much of the social media rumours that are put up on X, which weren't taken down by X, are coming from someone who's describes themselves as an Irish expat living, based in a US citizen who came from Ireland and living, splitting their time between, I think, the Middle East and the US and stuff. So it's someone outside this state who
who's interfering with our Democratic
with the Democratic. So the old-fashioned smear campaign or dirty tricks campaign might come from, political opponents at home, but this is something very different. And when it's coming from someone outside this country who is mostly US based, you have to ask, what's the agenda behind this? Why are they doing this? On whose behest are they doing this? What's at play here?
For some reason, I think there's something else on in the next couple of weeks. Oh yeah, there's a budget. I mean, who knew? I mean, we were all so distracted by the fun of the presidential election over the last 6 weeks, at least, that the budget has kind of gone under the radar a bit. But we are now seeing a couple of patterns emerging. We're starting to see elements that will be in there in terms of housing and the social welfare package and so on. But overall, though, there's a big economic message here being hit on by a lot of the think tanks and state boards and independent agencies like the Central Bank and the ESRI, who are basically saying, stop throwing petrol on the fire here. We are not in 2008 and we don't want to go down that route again. Is there a point there that this government is in danger of losing economic credibility here if they can't show that their spending is under control?
Yeah, and it's strange. There are two narratives around this budget. One of them is that, way too much spending, a whiff of 2008 is how Labour's Jed Nash described it. On the other hand, there will be no further one-off cost of living measures. So there will be a narrative there that they're not giving enough away or they're not doing enough for hard-pressed people. So they're two completely different stories, different takes. And I think, Simon Harris has been trying to talk up the budget, saying this is going to be the most generous budget ever we've had. Micheál Martin tried to dampen talk of there being lots of giveaways saying, it's only going to have, be focused on the less well off. So there is that danger that the warnings coming from the central bank and the others saying, this has to be reined in. You're relying too much on those tech companies and all their billions. I think the comparison was made to it being similar to the taxes coming from the property sector back during the Celtic Tiger.
The stamp duty has been replaced by the corporation tax as the big intangible, which there's loads of it coming in now, but it could have all be gone tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. But
now the other point being made though is, I suppose it is different in 2008. The banking sector is not as overextended as it was back then. Number one, so we're not going to end up with a banking crisis, and secondly, the level of personal indebtedness of the public is not on the same level as well. So what the economists are kind of saying is, you're doing a good job of running the economy, even with all the outside threats like the tariffs. Like the global instability. Ireland is still pottering along well. They're over-reliant in certain sectors, but you can work on with that. Economic growth is still going to be better, even on a lower level than most European countries. So you're all going well there. But it's on the fiscal side that you have got an issue. You're being too spendthrift. So what are they supposed to do here? There's a 9.4 billion budget. Are they supposed to turn on a budget and going, well, actually, we're only going to spend 6 billion because that's what the economists are telling us.
Yeah, and especially when
we're not going to increase the pension by 12 quid because those economists over there are telling us we can't.
Yeah. Well, like, the difficulty then is that it's 2 weeks before a presidential election. And, you could say that it's coming after a general election, so they don't need any sort of giveaways. They can afford to be more prudent this time around. But will they be able to resist a budget that isn't shaped towards winning them votes in the presidential election?
Yeah.
And, if this budget lands badly, and I think the failure to have a specific cost of living package could land very badly, because people have grown used to it and people are saying that the cost of living is worse now than it was in the last three budgets. If that lands badly, will their parties be punished in the presidential election, or will it allow Sinn Féin and those parties on the left to make hay 2 weeks out from polling day? And a bad presidential election for Simon Harris is bad news. A bad presidential election for Micheál Martin is probably worse news. So will this be politics proofed in any way, or do they have to, ensure prudence is their approach? Well, it's not going to be in any event, but do they need to ensure prudence as their approach to counter that argument that they are being 2008 all over again?
Okay, Mary Regan, thank you. Please do follow the Irish Independent on YouTube, and you can follow Mary's coverage of the presidential election and indeed Budget 2026 on the Irish Independent.